Welcome, I'm Maria Reynolds, the curator here at Staatsburgh State Historic Site, the Gilded Age home of Ruth and Ogden Mills. While working at Staatsburgh, I've really enjoyed researching the servants who worked for the Mills family. The research that I've done has made these individuals come alive, and I'm fascinated every time I find a new piece of evidence telling me more about their lives. Some of this research led to a great exhibit entitled In the Service of Perfection, Staatsburgh's Elite Servants, which you can see here. It takes a closer look at 6 of the Mills' senior staff. In this series of videos, we will present information beyond what we can share in an exhibit or on a tour, and the focus of this video is Catharine Harper, the housekeeper. The first time Catharine Harper appears in records related to Staatsburgh is the 1860 census. Under her maiden name of Catharine Kennedy, she is listed at Staatsburgh as a 30-year-old domestic from Ireland. We don't have any details about her early life, but we do know that she was an Irish immigrant who traveled by ship to the United States sometime before 1860. The Irish potato famine during the 1840s and 50s was one of the primary reasons millions of people left Ireland in search of new opportunities in America. A large number of young Irish women ended up as domestic servants, just like Catharine Kennedy. She likely had to endure about 2 weeks at sea in the bowels of an uncomfortable and packed ship. Catharine Kennedy began working in the household of Ruth Mills' parents, Matron and Ruth Livingston, and according to the Poughkeepsie Sunday Courier, she became the nurse for their twin daughters, Ruth and Elizabeth, who were born in 1855. During this era, upper-class women spent only a small portion of the day with their children, while nursemaids and governesses did the hands-on child rearing. This often resulted in a strong bond between child and nurse. The New York State Census from 1865 also includes Catharine as a member of the Livingston household, and by this point her name is Catharine Harper, so she must have married between 1860 and 1865. Very little information exists about her husband John. There is just one Poughkeepsie Sunday Courier article that mentions he was a coachman for the family. In addition, his gravestone reveals that he died in 1894 at age 63. But unfortunately, any further details about his life remain a mystery. Domestic servants were usually not married, or if they did marry, they would often leave service in order to have children and start a family. But some did marry, especially higher-level servants, and they stayed in service usually without having children, just like the Harpers. Catharine continues to appear in the census as a member of the household in 1870 through 1900. When Ruth married Ogden Mills in 1882, it appears that she brought Catharine with her into her own household as her housekeeper, which was a very important position and the lead female employee. The housekeeper was responsible for hiring and supervising all the maids, inspecting rooms for cleanliness, keeping the household linens under lock and key, and also managing supplies after consulting with the chef. An article in the Poughkeepsie Sunday Courier from April 1896 mentioned the housekeeper, Mrs. Harper, had arrived with her assistants to work on setting up the furniture in some of the rooms in preparation for the family to occupy the house again after the expansion from 25 to 79 rooms was complete. Although Mrs. Harper worked for the Mills family in both New York City and Staatsburgh, she had a strong connection to Staatsburgh because she owned a home in the village. A brief mention in the Poughkeepsie Eagle News in October 1885 shows that her house was under construction. Property records show that land on High Street in the village was purchased by John and Catharine Harper in June 1885. This house still stands today and has been in the family of one of Staatsburgh's volunteers since 1960, which is why we're able to show both historic and contemporary images of the house. Not only is the house very spacious, over 3,000 square feet and 4 bedrooms, but it also has space for servants. There have been a few modifications over the years, but on the whole, the house can provide some clues about the status of Catharine Harper. There is a servant's staircase that leads to an attic and maid's quarters, as well as what looks to be a call button on the dining room floor. There are many other fine details throughout the house, and there's even a chauffeur's apartment above the garage. Although she was in service, her privileged and supervisory status as a housekeeper afforded Catharine Harper certain luxuries likely out of reach for a young maid. We wish we had more information about Catharine Harper. We have learned about her from census records and newspaper articles, but the most revealing document we have is her will. The Poughkeepsie Sunday Courier said that she passed away at the home of Ogden Mills on September 24, 1901, after an illness of many days. The article said she was 82 and was beloved by the family, who deeply mourn her loss. Her estate of $10,500 consisted of $4,000 in real estate and $6,500 in personal. In 2021 currency, this amount is equal to over $300,000. Her will has 28 bequests that detail who she wanted to leave her money and belongings to, which in turn reveals a lot about her life and relationships. Since she did not have a spouse or descendant to leave everything to, her will included a variety of different people and institutions that played a role in her life. First, several gifts were for priests or religious institutions. This shows how important religion was to Mrs. Harper and illustrates a common experience among Irish Catholic immigrants. A parish would create a space for Irish immigrants to gather and form a community. She gave $200 to St. Paul's Catholic Church in Staatsburgh, $200 to the Church of the Holy Communion in New York City, and $200 to St. Margaret's Episcopal Church in Staatsburgh. She also gave $200 to St. James Episcopal Church in Hyde Park to care for her cemetery plot. Below the cross on the stone on the ground, her husband John's inscription reads, "Erected as a tribute of affection." And Catherine's inscription is a Bible verse, Matthew chapter 25, verse 21. She and her husband were buried in the same cemetery as generations of Ruth's family, and eventually Ruth and Ogden themselves. In addition to the churches, she gave $500 to Father Neil Norbert McKinnon, S.J. He founded the Loyola School in New York City, and at the time of Mrs. Harper's death, was president of the school and the pastor of St. Ignatius Loyola Parish. Perhaps she attended this church when she was in New York City. She then made multiple bequests to the Reverend Michael J. Murray of Saugerties, New York, who, along with Harry Barker, the local Staatsburgh attorney, was one of the executors of her will. She gave Father Murray $1,200 and asked that $1,000 of the gift be used to say masses for the repose of her and her husband's souls. The remaining $200 was to be devoted to charity. She also gave him what she termed her small house and lot, which was adjacent to the larger house on High Street where she resided. Finally, she gave him her husband's gold watch and chain, which really seems to indicate that she held him in very high regard. At first, I wondered why she was giving money to the priest of a parish in Saugerties, which is 20 miles away and across the river. A 30-minute car ride today and a much, much longer trip 120 years ago. It doesn't seem like it would have made sense for her to travel across the river to attend Mass when several Catholic churches were closer. However, in uncovering some of his earlier placements, at various points, Father Murray previously served at St. Agnes Church on 43rd Street in New York City, St. Joseph's in Rhinecliff, and St. Mary's in Poughkeepsie. She also gave any residue or remainder of her estate, both real and person, not covered elsewhere in the will, to his current parish, St. Mary's in Saugerties. In addition to religious institutions, she also left $100 each to the New York Hospital and the New York Cancer Hospital. Perhaps she or her husband had received care at these hospitals. Next, Mrs. Harper included many local friends in her will, and she distributed her possessions among them. This shows Mrs. Harper's close circle of friends, which were primarily other Irish immigrant women. She gave Catherine Sheridan her cuckoo clock. Sheridan was the daughter of Irish immigrants, and she also worked for the Mills family as a maid, so Mrs. Harper was her boss. She gave all of her china to Mary Crilly, an Irish immigrant living in Staatsburgh. She gave all of her bedroom furniture to Winifred Washington. Washington was an Irish immigrant and also a domestic servant in Staatsburgh. In the census, she was listed as working in the household of Ruth's aunt and uncle, Rollins and Gertrude Lowndes. Mrs. Harper gave her friend Catherine Donovan all of her silverware and plate of any kind, as well as portraits of her and her husband. Since we don't have any images of Mrs. Harper or her husband, the fact that portraits did exist at one time is fascinating and frustrating. What happened to them? The mere fact that she had portraits painted is another indication of her status. I couldn't find any information about Catherine Donovan, but if any of her descendants are listening, get in touch with me. She also gave $100 to John Hines with the wish that he use it to invest in books to help him in his work. John was the son of Julia, a widow, Irish immigrant, and laundress in Staatsburgh. 2 years after Mrs. Harper's death, John Hines was ordained a Catholic priest, so it seems likely that she wanted to support him as he pursued his vocation. Mrs. Harper also made bequests to others who worked at Staatsburgh, including $200 to Estate Superintendent James Blair, also an Irish immigrant, and she left all of her books to be divided equally among Blair's children. She gave $200 to Henry M. Barker, Staatsburgh's farm manager, who served both Mrs. Mills and her father. And then Mrs. Harper gave his wife, Mary Barker, a selection of her personal belongings not specifically bequeathed in the will. Their son, Harry Barker, an executor of the will, also received $200. Lastly, she made 2 bequests to the family who employed her, and I think these reveal a lot about who Catharine Harper was and her relationship to the family she served. She left $100 to Ruth Livingston, who had first employed her as a nurse for her twin girls. The will stated that the money was given as a slight token of my esteem and affection for her, and also to make up any shortcomings in my service to her. Finally, in a touching gift that reveals the fondness between Catharine and Ruth, Catharine left Ruth her house, and she stipulated that, quote, in case Ruth Mills does not want to retain ownership of said premises, then I direct that my executors sell the same, and that out of the proceeds arising from such sale, that 2 articles of jewelry shall be purchased, one of which shall be given and belong to the said Ruth Mills, and the other shall be given to her sister, Mrs. George Bentinck, and I ask they accept the same as a memento of the love and devotion of their Nana. This is a most touching bequest, which really affirms that Mrs. Harper cared for the young woman she helped to raise and support. Despite these sentiments, it appears that Ruth did not exactly follow her wishes. In May 1903, Ruth sold the house to John Grubb, a local attorney, for $1. And then he, in turn, sold the house the following month to Harry C. Barker, also for $1. In addition to serving as one of the executors for Catharine Harper's will and receiving money in it, Barker was also Ruth Mills's lawyer and represented her on various occasions. It is possible that Ruth decided she wanted Barker to have the house. Barker was very involved in Staatsburgh village life. He served as the president of the Staatsburgh Union School Board and spearheaded efforts to build the Staatsburgh School Building that is now the New York State Parks Taconic Region headquarters.
Through her will, Catharine Harper left behind a blueprint of her life and relationships. Between the will and her house, we are able to have a greater understanding about this woman and her life in service to the Mills family. She was certainly held in high regard by the family and likewise. Although it is now 120 years after her death, we remember the impact she had at Staatsburgh and celebrate her life and her service.